You cannot board this flight. There's an issue with your credentials, and until it's resolved, you are denied access.
As I've already explained, military ID holders board last in this zone. You'll have to wait your turn like everyone else.
There must be something you can do. I just want to get on my flight. As I said, this flight is closed. We cannot help you.
The gate agent's voice cut through the busy terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport like a blade, loud and deliberate, and designed to humiliate, as she pointed directly at Colonel Dr. Janelle Mitchell and announced to everyone within earshot that this woman in the worn jeans and faded Howard University sweatshirt was trying to board a first-class flight with what was clearly a fraudulent ticket, and she needed to step aside immediately before security was called to remove her forcibly from the gate area. Janelle stood frozen at the podium, her boarding pass and military ID still extended in her dark-skinned hand, her natural hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face showing exhaustion from 36 hours of travel that had taken her from a classified location somewhere in the Middle East through 3 connecting flights to get home to Atlanta. And now this gate agent, a white woman in her 40s named Patricia Hallbrook according to her name tag, was speaking to her like she was a criminal, like she was less than human, like the idea of a black woman in casual clothes having a legitimate first-class ticket was impossible and obviously suspicious. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of line. This ticket has been flagged in our system, and there are questions about how you obtained it. And I cannot allow you to board until we verify your identity and your payment method. And honestly, I'm not sure how you thought you'd get away with this, but we deal with ticket fraud constantly, and you're not the first person to try to scam their way into first class," Patricia said, her voice dripping with accusation and barely concealed contempt. And she made a show of picking up her phone like she was about to call security, and the other passengers in line behind Janelle began to murmur and shift uncomfortably, some of them recording on their phones, others looking at Janelle with suspicion and judgment, assuming that where there was smoke, there must be fire, assuming that this professional-looking gate agent must have good reason to publicly accuse this tired black woman in casual clothes of criminal behavior. Janelle felt the familiar weight settling over her chest, the exhaustion that came not from the 36 hours of travel, but from the lifetime of moments exactly like this one. Moments where her presence in spaces deemed too good for her was questioned, where her legitimacy was doubted, where she had to prove over and over again that she belonged, that she had earned her place, that she was not a fraud or a mistake or an affirmative action token, but a human being with credentials and accomplishments that would make most people's heads spin. "Ma'am, there's no problem with my ticket. I'm Colonel Dr. Janelle Mitchell. I'm returning from deployment. This ticket was issued by the United States Air Force through the official military travel system. My confirmation number is right here, and my military ID is right here, and I've already been through TSA pre-check with these same credentials, so I'm not sure what the issue is, but I've been traveling for a day and a half. And I would really appreciate if we could resolve this quickly so I can get home to my family," Janelle said, keeping her voice level and professional despite the rage and humiliation burning in her throat, despite wanting to scream at this woman who had decided within 3 seconds of seeing her that she was a problem to be dealt with rather than a passenger to be served. Patricia barely glanced at the military ID, waving it away like it was irrelevant, and she raised her voice even louder, clearly wanting the growing crowd of onlookers to hear her performance of authority and vigilance. "Anyone can get a fake military ID. That doesn't prove anything, and frankly your attitude is making me more suspicious. If this was a legitimate ticket you wouldn't be getting so defensive, and I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I know fraud when I see it. So you can either step aside willingly or I can have TSA and airport police escort you out of this terminal. And trust me, you don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." She crossed her arms over her chest, her expression smug and satisfied, clearly enjoying the power she wielded over this woman she had already judged and found guilty without trial, and Janelle felt something crack inside her. Not break entirely, but crack. A fracture in the professional armor she had built over 23 years of military service, over a lifetime of being underestimated and dismissed, and having to be twice as good to get half as much respect. I am not committing fraud. I am a colonel in the United States Air Force. I have served my country for over 2 decades. I'm a trauma surgeon who has saved hundreds of lives in combat zones. And this ticket was issued through official military channels for my return from a deployment that I cannot discuss with you because it's sci-fi, and I am asking you, as politely as I can manage after 36 hours of travel, to please scan my ticket and verify what I'm telling you instead of making assumptions based on what I'm wearing or what I look like. Janelle's voice shook slightly now, not with fear but with the effort of containing everything she wanted to say. Every sharp word and justified anger that she was forcing down because she knew from experience that a black woman showing anger would only make this worse, would only confirm whatever stereotypes this gate agent was already operating under, would give Patricia the excuse she seemed to be looking for to call security and have her removed. But Patricia was already shaking her head, already reaching for her radio, already saying, "That's it, I'm calling security. You're being belligerent and uncooperative, and I will not be spoken to in that tone. You need to leave this gate area immediately, or you will be arrested for trespassing and interfering with airport operations." And Janelle felt the world tilting, felt the injustice of it crushing down on her shoulders, because she had spent the last 9 months in a desert medical facility putting soldiers back together, working 18-hour shifts in a tent operating theater, sleeping 4 hours a night if she was lucky, missing her daughter's 13th birthday and her son's high school graduation and her wedding anniversary, serving her country with everything she had. And this was how she was being treated coming home. Like a criminal, like a liar, like someone whose word meant nothing, and whose service meant nothing, and whose existence in this space was inherently suspicious and wrong. The crowd was getting larger now, business travelers and families stopping to watch the drama unfold, and Janelle could see their faces, some sympathetic but most neutral or suspicious, already siding with the authority figure in the airline uniform, already assuming that this black woman must have done something to deserve this treatment. A few passengers behind her in line were getting impatient, loudly complaining that they were going to miss their flight because of this holdup. And one man, a white businessman in an expensive suit, actually said to his companion in a voice clearly meant to be overheard, "This is exactly why I fly private when I can. You don't have to deal with people trying to game the system and hold up everyone else." Janelle heard it, absorbed it like another small cut in 1,000 cuts, and she closed her eyes for just a moment, trying to find the center of calm that had gotten her through firefights and mass casualty events and impossible surgical cases, trying to remember that she was more than this moment, more than this woman's prejudice, more than the assumptions of strangers. That's when she heard the voice behind her, a deep authoritative voice with the unmistakable tone of command, saying, "I don't know what's happening here, but I suggest you think very carefully about your next move, because the woman you're currently accusing of fraud is one of the most decorated officers in the United States Air Force. And if you call security on her, you're going to create an incident that will end very badly for you and this airline." Janelle turned, and her exhausted brain took a moment to process what she was seeing, because walking toward the gate were 3 men in military dress uniforms. And not just any uniforms. These were generals, 3-star and 4-star generals based on the insignia she could see even through her tired eyes. And they were striding through the terminal with the kind of presence that made civilians instinctively move out of their way. And they were looking at her with expressions of recognition and concern. The lead general was a tall black man in his early 60s, his chest heavy with medals and ribbons, his bearing radiating decades of command authority, and Janelle recognized him immediately as General Marcus Thompson, the Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, one of the highest-ranking officers in the entire military, and behind him were Lieutenant General Robert Chen and Lieutenant General Sarah Martinez. And all three of them were now standing in front of Gate B-47 staring at Patricia Holbrook with expressions that could freeze fire. "Colonel Mitchell, are you all right?" General Thompson asked, his voice softer now, concerned, and he looked at her with the kind of respect that made Janelle's throat tighten with emotion, because here was someone who knew exactly who she was and what she had done and what she was worth. Patricia's face had gone completely white, her earlier confidence evaporating as she looked between Janelle and these three generals in full dress uniform, clearly trying to process this impossible situation, clearly beginning to understand that she had made a catastrophic error in judgment. I was just. The ticket was flagged in the system, and I was followed. Wing protocol, and she wasn't cooperating, and Patricia stammered, her voice losing all its earlier authority, and General Martinez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with silver hair and an expression that could cut steel, stepped forward and held out her hand. "Let me see the ticket and the military ID, General Martinez said. Not asked, commanded, and Patricia handed them over with shaking hands, and the general examined them for exactly 5 seconds before handing them back to Janelle with a nod. "Everything is in perfect order, as Colonel Mitchell told you it would be. This ticket was issued through Defense Travel System as part of her return from a classified deployment in support of Operation Inherent Resolve. And the only thing flagged in your system is probably the fact that it's a military-issued ticket, which sometimes triggers additional verification. But that verification takes approximately 30 seconds if you actually bother to check instead of making assumptions and publicly humiliating a decorated combat veteran." The rebuke was delivered in a calm, measured tone that somehow made it even more devastating, and Patricia looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. General Thompson turned to address the crowd that had gathered, his voice carrying easily across the gate area. "For those of you recording this on your phones, let me provide some context. The woman who was just accused of ticket fraud and threatened with arrest is Colonel Dr. Janelle Mitchell. She is a trauma surgeon with the 455th Expeditionary Medical Group. She has served in Iraq and Afghanistan across multiple deployments spanning 2 decades. She has been awarded the Bronze Star with Valor, the Meritorious Service Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters, the Air Force Commendation Medal, and the Combat Medical Badge. She has personally saved the lives of over 300 service members under fire, and she is returning from 9 months in a classified location where she ran a forward surgical team that had a 97% survival rate for casualties, which is unprecedented in the history of combat medicine. And she was just accused of being a fraud because she was tired and wearing comfortable clothes after 36 hours of travel. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the ambient sounds of the airport, and several of the passengers who had been filming looked ashamed, lowering their phones, and the businessman who had made the comment about gaming the system had disappeared into the crowd. Patricia was shaking now, her face cycling through shades of red and white, and she opened her mouth several times without sound coming out, and finally she managed to say, "I didn't know. I had no way of knowing. She didn't tell me she was a colonel, she just said." But General Chen, a stern-faced man in his late 50s with close-cropped gray hair, cut her off with a raised hand. "She showed you her military ID. She told you exactly who she was. She gave you her rank and her name. She explained that the ticket came from the military travel system, and you dismissed all of that because you had already decided, based on how she looked and what she was wearing, that she must be committing fraud, and that's not a protocol failure. That's a bias failure. That's you seeing a black woman in casual clothes and immediately assuming criminality, rather than considering even for a moment that she might be exactly who she said she was." General Chen's words were precise and cutting, and Patricia had tears forming in her eyes now, whether from shame or fear of consequences. It was hard to tell. Janelle found her voice again, steadier now with these three generals standing beside her like shields, like validation, like proof that she was not crazy. She had not deserved this treatment. She had been wronged. "I just wanted to go home," she said quietly, and her voice cracked on the last word, and General Thompson put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "And you will. You'll board this flight in first class exactly as your ticket indicates, and you'll be treated with the respect and dignity that every passenger deserves, and that you especially have earned through your service. And this airline will be answering some very serious questions about their training and their protocols, and how one of their employees felt empowered to publicly humiliate a military officer based on nothing but prejudice and assumption." He turned to Patricia, his expression hardening again. "I want your supervisor here immediately, and I want the airport manager here as well, and you're going to explain to them exactly what happened here and why you felt justified in threatening a decorated combat veteran with arrest. And then they're going to explain to me what steps they're going to take to ensure this never happens again to any service member traveling through this airport." The next 20 minutes were a blur of apologies and explanations, and airline supervisors and airport managers arriving and looking increasingly horrified as they understood the magnitude of what had occurred. And Patricia was escorted away from the gate to be relieved of her duties pending an investigation. And Janelle was upgraded to a suite on the flight at no charge and given profuse apologies from people in expensive suits who kept using phrases like "isolated incident" and "not reflective of our values" and "immediate corrective action." But Janelle barely heard them because she was so tired, so bone-deep exhausted, not just from the travel, but from the constant battle of existing while black in spaces that questioned her right to be there. The three generals insisted on waiting with her until boarding began, and during that time, General Thompson explained that they had been on the same flight, heading to Washington, D.C. for a Joint Chiefs meeting, and they had been in the Admiral's Club Lounge when they received an alert on their phones from the Defense Travel System, indicating that a military ticket had been flagged for potential fraud investigation at Gate B47. And when they saw the name associated with the ticket was Colonel Janelle Mitchell, all three of them had immediately left the lounge to intervene because they knew exactly who she was and what she had done. "We've been following your work in theater, Colonel. Your surgical team's outcomes have been extraordinary. You've revolutionized forward trauma care protocols. And the research you've been conducting on hemorrhage control in austere environments is going to save countless lives for decades to come. And beyond your medical expertise, the reports from your commanding officers consistently highlight your leadership, your mentorship of younger surgeons, your calm under pressure, and your unwavering commitment to the mission and to your patients." General Martinez spoke with obvious respect and admiration, and Janelle felt tears threatening because after the humiliation of the past half hour, this recognition from the highest levels of her profession felt like oxygen after drowning. "Thank you, ma'am. I was just doing my job. I love what I do. I love taking care of our troops. And I hate that politics and bureaucracy sometimes get in the way of that mission. But I've never regretted my choice to serve, even on days like today when it's really hard to remember why I put up with all of this." Janelle's voice was soft, and she wiped at her eyes, and General Thompson smiled, a warm, genuine smile that transformed his stern features. "Colonel, what happened here today had nothing to do with the military and everything to do with civilian ignorance and prejudice. And while I can't control how every gate agent in America perceives our service members, I can make damn sure that this airline understands the cost of treating military personnel, especially our officers of color and our women officers, with anything less than the respect they deserve. And I can promise you that by the time our legal affairs office is done with their training review, every employee of this airline will know your name and your story, and will think twice before making assumptions about any passenger based on appearance." His tone was firm, protective, almost fatherly, and Janelle felt some of the tension leaving her shoulders. When boarding finally began, the gate agent who replaced Patricia, A young black man named David, who looked absolutely terrified of making any mistakes, called for first-class passengers and then specifically invited Colonel Mitchell to board first, ahead of even the generals. And when Janelle stood up to walk down the jet bridge, every service member in the gate area, and there were at least a dozen in various uniforms, stood at attention as a sign of respect, and several civilians began to applaud. And it was overwhelming and humbling, and made Janelle simultaneously want to disappear and want to stand taller. On the plane, the flight attendants treated her like royalty, bringing her water and blankets before takeoff, and the lead flight attendant, an older woman named Carol with kind eyes, leaned down and quietly apologized on behalf of her entire profession for what had happened at the gate. And Janelle accepted the apology with grace, even though she knew Carol personally bore no responsibility for Patricia's actions. The three generals boarded after her, and General Thompson paused by her seat and said, "Get some rest, Colonel, you've earned it. And when you're ready to return to duty, there's a position opening up at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center that I think would be perfect for you, leading the trauma surgery department and training the next generation of combat surgeons. We can discuss it after you've had some leave time. But I wanted you to know that your work has not gone unnoticed at the highest levels, and we value you, we see you, and we're grateful for your service." Janelle nodded, not trusting her voice, and as the plane pushed back from the gate and began its taxi toward the runway, she finally allowed herself to close her eyes and breathe, really breathe, for what felt like the first time in months. But sleep didn't come immediately because her mind kept replaying the incident, kept examining it from different angles, kept asking the questions she had asked herself 1,000 times before. Would this have happened if she had been white? Would a white woman in comfortable clothes with a military ID have been accused of fraud and threatened with arrest? Would a white man have been treated with such immediate suspicion and contempt? And the answer she knew from years of experience and countless similar incidents of varying severity, was no, probably not, almost certainly not. And that knowledge was a weight she carried everywhere, a tax on her existence that her white colleagues would never have to pay. The flight to Atlanta was only 90 minutes, and Janelle spent most of it staring out the window at the clouds and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. And her mind drifted back, the way it often did when she was exhausted and her defenses were down, to the beginning of her military career, and all the time she had been underestimated and dismissed, and had to prove herself over and over again. She remembered being one of only 3 black women in her class at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences, the military's medical school, and having a professor tell her in her first year that she might want to consider a less demanding specialty than surgery because the hours and the pressure might be too much for her. And when she asked if he had given that same advice to her male classmates, he had backtracked and claimed he was just looking out for her well-being. But she knew. She knew it was because he looked at her and saw someone who didn't belong in the operating room, someone who should be satisfied with a less prestigious, less demanding path. She remembered her surgical residency at Johns Hopkins, where she was the only black woman in her program, and how her competence was constantly questioned while her white male colleagues were given the benefit of the doubt. How her successes were attributed to luck or affirmative action while her mistakes were seen as proof that she didn't have what it took, and how she had to be not just good but exceptional, not just competent but perfect, because anything less would confirm the biases of those who were looking for reasons to believe she didn't deserve to be there. She remembered her first deployment to Afghanistan, where she was a young captain running a combat surgical hospital, and a visiting colonel from another unit had assumed she was a nurse and had asked her to fetch him coffee. And when she politely corrected him and explained that she was the chief of surgery, he had laughed like it was a joke. And when he realized she was serious, he had said, "Well, aren't we moving up in the world?" With a tone that made it clear he thought her position was about politics rather than merit. She remembered the hundreds of small moments and large moments where she had been made to feel like an outsider in her own profession, like an imposter in the uniform she wore with pride, like someone who had to constantly justify her existence in spaces where white men moved freely without question. But she also remembered the patients, the young soldiers and Marines and sailors and airmen who she had pulled back from the brink of death, who had looked up at her from gurneys with grateful, terrified eyes, and held onto her hand while she explained what she was going to do to save them, who had written her letters months and years later thanking her for giving them a second chance at life, who had named their children after her, who had told her she was their hero, and those memories, those moments of pure purpose and connection, were what kept her going when everything else felt like too much. She remembered the young female soldiers who had sought her out for mentorship, especially the women of color who saw her rank and her accomplishments, and dared to believe that they too could rise to positions of leadership in an institution that wasn't always welcoming to people who looked like them. And she remembered telling them the same thing her own mentor, a black female colonel who had paved the way before her, had told her. You belong here, your presence matters. You're not an imposter or a token. You earned your place, and don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. But also understand that you're going to have to work harder and be better and prove yourself more often than your white male peers. And that's not fair, but it's the reality, and you can either let it defeat you or let it forge you into someone stronger and more resilient and more determined to change the system for those who come after you. The plane touched down in Atlanta smoothly, and Janelle gathered her small carry-on bag, the only luggage she had brought because the rest of her things would be shipped from her deployment location. And as she walked up the jet bridge into the terminal, she turned on her phone for the first time since boarding, and immediately it began buzzing with notifications, texts and calls and voicemails from friends and family who had somehow already heard about the incident at the gate. Because of course they had. Because in the age of social media, nothing stayed private for long, and several people had sent her links to videos that passengers had posted showing Patricia Holbrook accusing her of fraud and the 3 generals arriving to defend her. And the videos were already going viral, already being shared thousands of times with hashtags like Respect Our Troops and Traveling While Black and Gate-Agent Fail. Her daughter Jasmine had texted, Mom, I saw the video, are you okay? I can't believe that woman treated you like that. I'm so angry, please call me when you land. Dad is furious and already talking to lawyers. And Janelle smiled despite everything because her family's protective anger on her behalf was warming even though she didn't want this to become a bigger thing than it already was. She just wanted to get home and hug her kids and sleep in her own bed for the first time in 9 months. Her son Marcus had texted a series of increasingly outraged messages ending with, "That gate agent is about to learn what happens when you mess with Colonel Dr. Janelle Mitchell. The internet is going to eat her alive, and honestly she deserves it. I'm so sorry you had to deal with that, Mom. You're literally a hero, and she treated you like a criminal. I love you and I'm so proud of you." Her husband David, a high school principal who she had met in college 25 years ago and who had been her rock through every deployment and every challenge, had texted, "Nell, I'm at the arrivals curb with the kids. We saw the video, I'm so sorry baby. You don't deserve this. No one deserves this, but especially not you after everything you've sacrificed for this country. We're here when you're ready, take your time. We love you so much. Welcome home, sweetheart." Janelle felt tears spilling down her cheeks as she read his message, felt the accumulation of exhaustion and stress and humiliation and vindication all crashing over her at once, and she had to stop walking and lean against a wall in the terminal for a moment to compose herself. A young woman in an army uniform approached her hesitantly, clearly recognizing her from the videos that were circulating, and she saluted despite being in an indoor area where saluting wasn't required, and she said, "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you for your service, and I'm sorry about what happened at the gate, and I'm really glad those generals showed up when they did, and I hope you know that a lot of us, especially those of us who are black women in the military, we see you, we appreciate you, and you inspire us every single day." Janelle returned the salute and thanked the young soldier, and they spoke for a few moments about the woman's plans to apply to medical school, and Janelle gave her a business card and told her to reach out when she was ready because she mentored pre-med service members and would be happy to help. And the interaction, brief as it was, reminded Janelle why representation mattered, why staying in the fight mattered, why refusing to be pushed out or silenced or diminished mattered. By the time Janelle reached the baggage claim and headed toward the arrivals area, her phone was ringing, and it was a number she didn't recognize with a DC area code. And normally she wouldn't answer, but something made her pick up, and the voice on the other end identified herself as Lieutenant Colonel Andrea Williams from Air Force Public Affairs, and she was calling to inform Janelle that the incident at the gate had become a major news story, that the airline had already issued a public apology and announced that Patricia Hallbrook had been terminated, that the airport was conducting a review of their policies regarding treatment of military personnel, and that multiple news outlets were requesting interviews with Janelle if she was willing to tell her story. With respect, ma'am, I appreciate the information, but I'm not interested in becoming a story. I just want to go home to my family and put this behind me, and I don't want that gate agent's life to be destroyed. I want her to learn and grow and do better. But I don't need vengeance or viral fame. I just need rest and time with the people I love. Janelle's voice was firm but exhausted, and Lieutenant Colonel Williams responded with understanding and respect, saying that she completely understood, but that the story was already out there and would continue with or without Janelle's participation. So if she changed her mind about speaking to media on her own terms, the offer stood. And in the meantime, public affairs would do their best to manage the narrative and protect her privacy. Janelle thanked her and ended the call, and then she walked through the automatic doors into the warm Atlanta evening. And there they were, her family, David tall and handsome with flecks of gray in his beard, Jasmine nearly as tall as her mother now with the same intelligent eyes and beautiful dark skin, and Marcus broad-shouldered and serious-faced, already looking so much like a man at 18, and they were holding a hand-painted banner that said, "Welcome home, Colonel Mom, our hero." And when they saw her, they started running, and Janelle dropped her bag and ran too, and they collided in a tangle of arms and tears and laughter, and David was whispering in her ear, "I've got you, you're home, you're safe, I've got you." And Jasmine was crying into her shoulder, and Marcus was trying to be stoic but failing. And this moment of pure love and belonging was worth everything, was worth every sacrifice and every hardship and every humiliation. They drove home through familiar Atlanta streets, and Janelle sat in the passenger seat holding David's hand while the kids chattered from the back about everything she had missed, catching her up on school and friends and family drama and neighborhood news. And it was beautifully mundane and normal, and exactly what she needed. When they pulled into the driveway of their house in the Virginia Highlands neighborhood, Janelle saw that the porch lights were on and there were yellow ribbons tied to the trees, and the neighbors had put up a welcome home banner. And she felt overwhelmed again by the goodness of ordinary people, by the communities that supported military families, by the contrast between Patricia Hallbrook's cruelty and this abundance of kindness. Inside, the house smelled like home, like David's cooking and Jasmine's vanilla perfume, and the lemon cleaner they used on the hardwood floors. And there were fresh flowers on the kitchen table and a home-cooked meal waiting. And Janelle stood in the middle of her kitchen and just breathed it in. This space that was hers, this life that was hers, this family that was hers. And she felt the armor she had been wearing for 9 months finally beginning to crack and fall away. They ate dinner together, all 4 of them around the table like they hadn't been able to do since last year. And they talked and laughed and argued playfully and were a family again. And Janelle felt pieces of herself that had been fragmented by deployment slowly knitting back together. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed and David was doing dishes, Janelle sat on the couch with her laptop and finally looked at the videos and articles about the gate incident. And she was shocked by how widespread the story had become. It was on CNN and Fox News and MSNBC. It was trending on Twitter and TikTok and Instagram. It was being discussed on military forums and social justice platforms and aviation industry blogs. And the consensus was overwhelming condemnation of Patricia Holbrook and the airline, with most commentary focusing on the racial dynamics of the incident, the automatic suspicion applied to Black people in spaces of privilege, the particular vulnerability of Black women to being dismissed and disbelieved, and the larger systemic issues of bias in customer service industries. But there were also the predictable counter-narratives, the comments saying that Patricia was just doing her job, that she couldn't have known Janelle was really a colonel, that race had nothing to do with it, and people were making it about race when it was really about security and protocol. And Janelle felt tired reading those comments because they required such willful blindness, such determined ignorance of how bias actually operates in the real world, such refusal to consider that maybe, just maybe, a Black woman in comfortable clothes was treated with more suspicion than a white woman in the same situation would have been. There were also comments attacking her military service, claiming she only achieved her rank because of diversity initiatives, questioning whether she was really as decorated as the generals had said, suggesting that she was playing the victim card and should be grateful that security is taken seriously. And those comments hurt more because they targeted the thing she was most proud of, the career she had built through decades of sacrifice and excellence. David came and sat beside her, gently closing the laptop and pulling her into his arms, and he said, "You don't need to read that garbage. You know who you are. You know what you've accomplished, and the opinions of ignorant strangers on the internet don't change any of that. You've saved hundreds of lives. You've served with honor and distinction. You've broken barriers and paved the way for others, and you've done it all while dealing with racism and sexism that would have broken lesser people. And I'm in awe of you every single day, and so are your children, and so are those 3 generals who stopped everything to defend you, and so are the thousands of service members you've trained and mentored and operated on. And that's what matters, not some anonymous coward leaving racist comments on YouTube." His words were fierce and loving, and Janelle leaned into his strength and let herself feel held and protected and cherished. The next morning, Janelle woke up in her own bed for the first time in 9 months, and for a few blissful seconds she forgot about the gate incident, forgot about the videos and the news coverage, forgot about everything except the joy of being home. But then her phone started ringing, and it didn't stop for the next 3 days because everyone wanted to talk to her. News programs wanted interviews. Advocacy organizations wanted her to speak at events. Lawyers wanted to discuss lawsuits against the airline, and the Air Force wanted her to participate in a training video about bias awareness. And it was overwhelming and exhausting. And all Janelle wanted was to be with her family and process her deployment and transition back to normal life. But she also understood that this moment, as uncomfortable as it was, represented an opportunity to have important conversations about race and bias and the treatment of service members. And after discussing it with David and her kids and her mentors, she agreed to do one interview with a reputable journalist from NPR. And in that interview, she spoke with characteristic grace and intelligence about what had happened, about the larger patterns it represented, about her love for her country and her service despite its imperfections, and about her hope that this incident would lead to meaningful change in how airlines and other institutions train their employees to recognize and counteract implicit bias. I don't want to see Patricia Holbrook destroyed. I don't want her to lose everything and be unemployable. I want her to have the opportunity to learn and grow and become someone who doesn't make those same assumptions about people based on their appearance. And I think that's possible if she's willing to do the work, and I hope she is. But I also want airlines and airports and all service industries to understand that this wasn't an isolated incident. This happens to Black people and other people of color constantly. These small and large moments of being presumed guilty, being presumed fraudulent, being presumed not to belong in certain spaces. And it takes a toll. It's exhausting and demoralizing, and it makes you question yourself even when you know you've done nothing wrong. And it shouldn't be like that. We can do better. We must do better. Her words were measured and thoughtful, and the interview went viral in its own right. And many people commented that her grace in the face of such treatment was itself a form of leadership. 3 weeks after the incident, Janelle received a formal letter from the airline's CEO, a lengthy apology that included a commitment to comprehensive bias training for all employees, the creation of an advisory board to review policies related to diverse passenger populations, a significant donation to veteran support organizations, and a personal invitation to meet with leadership to discuss how they could improve their service to military personnel. The letter also informed her that Patricia Holbrook had been given the option of termination or participation in an intensive diversity and inclusion training program, followed by reassignment to a non-customer-facing role. And she had chosen the latter. And part of her training would include meeting with people she had wronged to understand the impact of her actions. And she had specifically requested the opportunity to apologize to Janelle in person, if Janelle was willing. Janelle thought about it for several days, discussed it with her family and her therapist, and ultimately decided that she was willing to meet with Patricia, not for Patricia's sake but for her own, because she wanted to look the woman in the eye and say the things she hadn't been able to say in that chaotic moment at the gate. And she wanted to believe that people could change, that education and exposure and genuine remorse could transform someone's worldview. And she wanted to model for her children the kind of grace and strength that allowed for both accountability and forgiveness. The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a conference room at the airport's administrative offices, with a mediator present. And when Janelle walked in and saw Patricia sitting there looking smaller and older and genuinely remorseful, she felt something soften in her chest, not forgiveness yet, but the possibility of it. Patricia apologized. And it was clear she had been coached, but also that the emotion behind the words was real. She spoke about her own bias, ease that she hadn't even been aware of, about the automatic assumptions she made about people based on their appearance, about how watching the videos of the incident from an outside perspective had horrified her, about seeing herself through others' eyes, and recognizing that she had become the kind of person she would have claimed she could never be. And she thanked Janelle for being willing to meet with her when she had every right to refuse. And she promised to do better, to be better, to use this as a catalyst for genuine change in her life. Janelle listened, and when Patricia finished, she spoke about what it felt like to be on the receiving end of that bias, about the accumulated weight of a lifetime of similar incidents, about the particular pain of serving your country with everything you have, and then being treated like a criminal when you try to come home, and about her hope that this would be a learning moment not just for Patricia, but for everyone watching. I accept your apology, and I believe you're sincere, and I hope you understand that this isn't about you being a bad person. It's about all of us, all of society, being infected with biases that we inherit from culture and media and history. And the question is whether we're willing to examine those biases and actively work to counteract them. Because if we don't, if we just go along with our automatic assumptions, we end up in situations like this, where real harm is done to real people. And I know you didn't wake up that morning planning to humiliate a black woman, but your unexamined biases led you there anyway. And that's the insidious thing about racism and other forms of prejudice. They don't require intention or malice. They just require inattention, just require us not questioning our first assumptions about people. Janelle's words were firm but not unkind, and Patricia nodded, tears streaming down her face. And by the end of the meeting, both women were crying. And while they would never be friends, there was a sense that something important had happened, some small movement toward understanding and accountability. 6 months later, Janelle reported to her new assignment at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, where she took over as the chief of trauma surgery, the first black woman to hold that position in the hospital's history. and she built a department known for both its clinical excellence and its commitment to diversity and inclusion, recruiting and mentoring surgeons from underrepresented backgrounds, and creating a culture where everyone was valued for their skills and dedication, rather than judged by their appearance. She became a sought-after speaker on topics of leadership, resilience, and bias in healthcare, and she used her platform to advocate for policies that would make the military and the medical profession more equitable and just. And she never forgot what it felt like to stand at that gate in Atlanta being accused of fraud. And she used that memory as fuel to fight for a world where the next generation wouldn't have to endure the same indignities. The story of the gate agent incident became a case study used in diversity training programs across multiple industries, and the videos were shown in workshops and seminars as an example of how implicit bias manifests in real-world situations and the importance of questioning our assumptions about people. And while Janelle was often uncomfortable with the attention, she understood that her experience had resonated because it was both unique in its dramatic resolution and universal in its underlying dynamics, because almost everyone, especially people of color, had experienced some version of being presumed not to belong, of having their legitimacy questioned, of being made to feel like an imposter in spaces they had every right to occupy. Years later, when Janelle was promoted to Brigadier General, becoming one of the few black female generals in Air Force history, she gave a speech at her promotion ceremony that referenced that day in Atlanta, and she said, "I've faced the enemy in combat zones. I've performed surgery under mortar fire. I've made life and death decisions in seconds. But some of the hardest battles I've fought have been against the bias and prejudice that told me I didn't belong here, that questioned my competence, that saw my rank and my accomplishments and still looked at me and saw someone suspicious, someone fraudulent, someone who needed to prove herself over and over again. And I'm grateful for those battles because they forged me into someone stronger and more determined and more committed to building a military where everyone is judged by their character and their competence rather than their color or their gender. And I'm grateful to everyone who stood with me in those battles. From the 3 generals who defended me in an airport terminal to my family, who has supported me through every deployment and every challenge. And I'm most grateful to the young service members who see my star and dare to dream that they too can rise to these heights, because representation matters, visibility matters, and every time one of us breaks through a barrier, we make it easier for those who follow. The applause in the room was thunderous, and among those applauding were General Marcus Thompson, now retired but still a mentor and friend, and her husband David and her children, now young adults making their own way in the world, and dozens of service members whose lives she had saved or careers she had mentored. And in that moment, Janelle felt the fullness of her journey, the struggles and triumphs, the humiliations and vindications, the loneliness of being a trailblazer, and the joy of knowing she had paved the way for others. And she understood that the incident with Patricia Hallbrook, as painful as it had been, was just one chapter in a much larger story about perseverance and dignity, and the refusal to be diminished by others' limited vision. Today, Brigadier General Dr. Janelle Mitchell serves as the Deputy Surgeon General of the Air Force, and she continues to advocate for excellence in military medicine and equity in military culture. And she still travels frequently, and every time she approaches a gate agent with her military ID and her boarding pass, there's a split second where she braces for the possibility of being challenged, of being doubted, of being seen as suspicious rather than distinguished. And that split second is the tax she pays for existing in a world that hasn't fully evolved past its prejudices. But she pays it with her head high and her spirit unbroken, because she knows who she is, she knows what she's worth, and she knows that the opinions of those who would diminish her say everything about them and nothing about her. And that knowledge, hard-won and battle-tested, is the armor she wears into every encounter, every challenge, every day of her extraordinary life.